Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the November 3rd Thursday Web Forum. This is actually our last Web Forum of 2016. Can't believe how fast this year has flown by. I'm Hillary Morris. I work on Blueprint User Support and Communications for the South Atlantic LCC. So your cooperative hosts this Web Forum on the third Thursday of every month, hence the name, at 10 a.m. And it's really just intended to keep everyone informed about current and ongoing work throughout the South Atlantic LCC and give everyone a chance to ask questions and provide input. So essentially, we follow the same agenda every month. I'll start out by introducing our presenter, who will speak for 30 to 40 minutes or so, and that'll leave us plenty of time for questions and discussions afterward. We'll spend the rest of the webinar on updates from LCC staff, and then follow that with an open discussion. So before I hand things off to Dr. Okey this morning, I want to go over a few logistics. Just to minimize background noise, I'm going to mute everybody during the presentation and put the conference in silent mode. So if you have any questions, either type them directly into the chat box, which I'll be monitoring, or you can hold them until after the presentation. And if you do use the chat box and want everyone to be able to read the question while we're having discussion, just remember to send the note to everyone by selecting the recipient in the drop-down box. So to speak at any time, all you need to do is press *6, and that will unmute your line. So before I mute everybody, does anyone need to speak up with questions or comments?
We're good here in St. Pete.
Awesome, thanks. Okay, here we go.
The conference is now in silent mode.
So presenting today, we have Dr. Tom Okey with the University of Victoria. He's the director at the Center for Climate Ecosystems and Health, and he's going to be talking to us about developing an integrated ecosystem model for the South Atlantic Bight. So Dr. Okey, I am passing presenter power over to you. Just go ahead and share your screen, and when you're ready to start talking, hit *6 to unmute.
Everybody, can you hear me?
Sure can, and I can see your slides, so you are all set. Thanks.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and thanks everybody for joining us. I'm pretty excited to share with you what we have been doing and thinking about for the last few months. And as you may see here, I have lengthened the title and just changed it a little bit just to make it clear of what I will be talking about. I am part of an integrated project. My piece, or my interest and expertise, is on the EcoPath with EcoSim modeling. That is going to be one of the sort of the hubs of the integration of the information that I'm going to be talking about today. I'm guessing that a portion of the audience is not marine people, but that doesn't matter. We're talking about ecosystems. I believe most of the people on the audience is scientists and managers and so forth, maybe a student or two. So I will pitch it accordingly. So we're talking about an integrative EcoPath with EcoSim model for the South Atlantic region for understanding coastal marine ecosystem changes. And there are a couple different affiliations there. I've listed Ocean Integrity Research here, just my consultancy, but I'm also affiliated with the University of Victoria, just as an adjunct professor. So again, thanks very much. And I did catch a cold, and hopefully I won't have a coughing fit. And I can't see, so bear with me. I'll do my best. I can't see the chat, but I think Hillary will relay the information if there's anything urgent. So if you have any questions as we go, I'm just happy to be dynamic and respond as we go. Okay, so I'm just going to start kind of basic, but I don't think I'll dwell because of the audience here. What I'm going to be talking about, the core of it, or the foundation of it, is really a food web model or a fishery ecosystem tropodynamic model. And obviously, this is just a very basic diagram of a marine food web. It is much simpler than the kind of articulation we have in some of these models. But obviously, in a subtropical system like the South Atlantic region, it's highly diverse, and so we are still going to have a lot of aggregation in this model. But we can talk a little bit about that. I personally just try to articulate the model as much as possible with the questions that we might want to ask in mind. But this modeling approach is that we're continuing for the South Atlantic region does not have individual specific questions. You might say it's really developing a tool for many different kinds of questions that folks might have for fisheries management, for spatial management, for climate change impacts, the effects of essential fish habitat, or the management of that habitat, the protection or the degradation of that habitat. So a whole variety of different questions, which is why some of these models become kind of general. Anyway, I have this logo of EcoPath with EcoSim that I'm starting with. You've probably seen this before, some of you, but I'm imagining some of you are not familiar with this particular modeling approach. I put the logo up because of the point it makes related to ecosystem-based management or ecosystem-based fisheries management. And that is that if you're focused on a particular stock or a particular species, you may have a lot of really good tools that are refined and that give you useful predictability or assessments of the stock and so forth. But as we also know, the motto here is "No fish is an island," meaning, of course, that they interact with other species, for example, and many other functional groups or species influence the population or the overall biomass of a particular species. And the flip side of that, obviously, within ecosystem-based management is when you are interacting with a species, like harvesting a species, obviously it will affect other species as well, and obviously sometimes habitat, etc. So that's where we're sort of starting fundamentally or philosophically with this kind of modeling approach. And it's sort of the other philosophy behind it is that you're trying to capture all of the flows or all of the dynamics in the system, some perhaps quite generally, and others in a more specific and articulated way. So there's a lot of debate. There has been over the last 20 years or so. Actually, Jeff Palavina put together the approach in the mid-'80s out in Hawaii, and that was the EcoPath part, which is the static description of trophic flows in the system, in any system. Since that time, it's been refined considerably, and for a long time, the sort of hub of the development of the EcoPath with EcoSim approach was the Fisheries Center at UBC, University of British Columbia, where I spent about 6 years. I originally took a position there, moved from San Francisco to Vancouver, took a position there to construct an EcoPath model of Prince William Sound for the 10-year anniversary of the Prince William Sound oil spill, to integrate, as a synthesis project, to integrate all the information, ecological information since the spill. And so that model was, at the time, the most articulated model that had been constructed, and these models have a life after you construct them. Many people have taken that model and used it within meta-analyses and other analyses. Anyway, the approach is quite popular all around the world, and this slide just shows that there's over 7,000 users and about over 800 peer-reviewed publications. So I won't really get into the debates about the general usefulness and the quality of it. It just has a really broad life right now. So and it's growing and being refined all the time. So basically, it really consists of three parts, and that is the EcoPath part, which is, again, a static description of the flows of biomass in a system, which include the fisheries as well. And then the EcoSim part, which is really a dynamic representation of the starting point, which is the EcoPath static starting point. So projecting changes in biomasses over time forced by either fisheries and nowadays other variables, including climate variables and so forth. So it's really blossoming in terms of application. And then the third part is EcoSpace, and that is a part which is obviously a spatial representation of that dynamic, temporal dynamic simulation approach. And so that is the EcoSpace part has really, again, blossomed in the last few years, driven largely by Jeroen Steinbeek, who has refined EcoSpace, and I'll mention him a little bit later. There is an EcoPath model of the South Atlantic Bight, and we put this together. Roger Poulies was instrumental in promoting the application or the use of EcoPath in the South Atlantic region for incorporation into fishery ecosystem plans and the planning and so forth. And so we actually originally put this together over 15 years ago, and with a broad collaborative approach, which I'll describe. And so I'm just showing here the spatial degree, or the spatial realm of the definition of that particular model. And this is just one representation, thanks to Kelly Kearney of NOAA, of the South Atlantic Bight food web model. And the scale, the vertical scale is trophic level. So these are all the functional groups and individual species. And I'm sorry, you probably can't see some of them because they're so small. Maybe you can, I don't know. But at the very top, you have some of the fisheries themselves, which are in the model. And so obviously the trophic level 1 is the primary producers in detritus, and then so forth. So I won't get into how that's calculated or why it's interesting. But so we have a project to advance the model that we have, and I'll tell you what's in that model. But essentially, our broad objectives are to build for the future a flexible and integrative ecosystem modeling suite that can be used for all the questions and uses that folks have. And generally to integrate existing models and data, and there's a lot more data and model output now, obviously, than there was then, and advance and refine the LCC conservation blueprint in various ways, and support the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council's move to space management, the fishery ecosystem plan, etc. Those are just broad. And so how do we do it? We put together a regional science team, a core team for this project with key pieces that will help enhance this kind of approach. Some of those pieces as well obviously have as much value on their own as well. But I'm just talking about sort of the integrative part within the ecosystem. So, the idea is to work with managers and decision makers to make sure these models are constructed in the best way we can. And we wanted to highlight the connectivities and dynamics between a coastal, ocean, and estuarine, riverine ecosystems. That was a real goal. And then obviously develop an ecosystem model. So, and these are the principal investigators that we have listed in our documentation for this effort. And then I also mentioned Jeroen Beek because of his key influence on EcoSpace, which I do believe will be key in this region. And so these models will link to these hydrodynamic oceanographic models and data and provide more realistic predictions about spatial policy options, predict impacts of episodic events. They're limited in space like oil spills, red tides, upwelling, and also used for, as I said, spatial management, policy searches, or trying to really estimate or understand what the impacts of different kinds of management decisions or policies will be, and so hopefully it will meet the immediate needs of all the management entities, including the South Atlantic Council. And so we have a few phases. One of them, this element 1 that I've listed here, is the model itself, this further development of the model. And then we have these 4 other elements that I'll mention here as well. So part of the model updating is some data conditioning from that's being done by South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, and then other key elements. For example, is the work that Royoung Hee is leading on coupled marine environmental assessment and prediction system. I'll mention that, and then for the connectivity to the estuarine systems, where Peter Sheng is also doing some modeling and studies of some of the estuaries, and we're exploring how we can link those scales to the larger scale as well, which is the question. So basically, I won't dwell on this, but EcoPath, the model itself, really is 2 master equations, and really the first one is about the consumption by any group has to equal, so this is food consumption, it has to equal the production, this production term, plus the respiration of that group, and plus any unassimilated food. And then the production itself, this is the second equation, the production has to equal the yield from that group, the predation on that group, the net migration, and other mortality. So it's a mass continuity model because there can be growth or increases or decreases or net migration. Rather than it's strictly a mass balance model, it's really mass continuity. Anyway, I don't know if that's so important, but all of the groups are then connected with diet compositions of each group, which is, and the units are all wet weight biomass. And so I did mention it has a history. Initially in 2001, we had a strawman 48-box model. 2004, we refined it with a preliminary 98-box model. And then in 2013, it was refined to address particular questions that people had. And so only a portion of the model was refined, the forage groups mostly. And so this is just the report that came out from the initial construction. And then this is a report that came out in 2014 describing the work we did on articulating the model for forage groups, and then just some interesting simulations and explorations we did regarding that. Okay, this is just to remind me to make the point that the way that I have always constructed these ecosystem models is, I think, the most preferred way, especially if it's going to be used by broad communities in a region and that is to have a broadly collaborative approach. You probably, some of you might recognize these folks as Alaska folks. I'm sorry, the photograph I had for this, but the point is that it's a broadly collaborative effort to estimate the parameters. And in terms of the South Atlantic Bight model, there were a number of primary contributors originally, and then a whole broad suite of what we were just calling secondary contributors. But everybody contributed, and there were more people as well. So it was sort of, I don't know, I wouldn't want to call it a consensus model, but it was contributed to by a number of people. So there are a lot of functional groups in the model. This is not actually all 99 of them, but this just gives you an example of the various groups and the level of aggregation or disaggregation. So there are some individual species that might be of interest or very important, broken out, and then there are groups that are more aggregated, just a little bit more aggregated, and then there are groups that will be groups that are very aggregated. So it just depends, and so it's a process and can be an art to identify the criteria that you want to use to aggregate or disaggregate based on all the species you have in the system. And so, just as an example, we can identify a number of species that are considered very, very valuable for the region. And so in this case, we simply use landing and landed value to identify these various species, which we just made sure that we broke out. Now, part of our process now is to be using all of the more recent and latest management plans and information on the actively managed species and the ones that have targets and reference points to actually make sure that we have this articulated properly, the overall model, and to break out those groups. So, there are adjustments happening in the model, and this just kind of shows for the forage fish groups that we broke out for this exercise about 3 or 4 years ago. Even these are, have a few different species within them. So these are very articulated, but still they're a little bit aggregated too, in terms of just the forage species that we were looking at. And so this is just another depiction of this 99 box model, that this latest version of the model that we have, which is not necessarily very useful, just other than to see that there's lots of connections. And so this is one. So just going back to the elements that are complementing each other amongst these teams for our project. This is element number 2, South Carolina Department of Natural Resources long-term survey data contribution. Tracy Smart is actually working to do queries and searches and data compilation to produce, for example, time series from when this model was constructed, the mid-90s, to the present, based on the CMAP data and other data that are available. So these would be sort of fishery-independent time series, obviously, that we would be able to calibrate our dynamic model to when we try to tune that model and recreate the ecosystem changes that have occurred since the mid-90s to calibrate it so that it can be useful for projecting into the future. So we know the skill is higher. So, and then here another element I just wanted to, element 3. Peter Sheng is doing various some work in some of the bays and estuaries and relating fishery data to salinity and other parameters. And I'm going to get to, when I get to the EcoSpace part, I'll show you how we are really creating bioclimatic envelope models to create the spatial manifestation of the EcoSpace model with actual response variables, as opposed to the way we used to do it in EcoSpace, which was simply just habitat preference. But I'll get to that in a sec. So the paper, I saw a paper come out, I saw it pop up this morning, which is going to be actually quite valuable for us. And this is a review of modeling approaches to understand the effects of watershed-based management actions to coastal ecosystems by Bight et al. 2017. And so here's a bunch of examples of EcoPath modeling efforts that are looking at eutrophication, salinity, habitat restoration in estuaries. And so that's going to be helpful for us to try to make that connection between, again, this broader marine scale, marine and coastal scale, and the more specific smaller scale dynamics that we know are very important in these estuaries. And then another element, I'm sure many of you know about this coupled Northwest Atlantic prediction system. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, sure can.
Okay, great. And so these layers of environmental variables are going to allow us to again express this fishery ecosystem food web model spatially in terms of the direct responses and known responses of various functional groups to these environmental variables. And again, I'll get to that when we talk about EcoSpace. So EcoSim, let me just check the time here. 7:30. I'm going to speed up a little bit here, I think. So again, the EcoSim is just temporal dynamic module space. I won't really dwell on this because you can learn about it, but it sort of relies on this foraging arena theory that Carl Walters talks about, which is essentially refugia, like ecosystems or biological communities are stable because animals can hide from predators. Prey can hide from predators, and so there are vulnerable states that they are in invulnerable states, and it's that vulnerability parameter that allows us to adjust the sensitivity of the model, of the various groups in the model, and that allows us to calibrate the model over time to known changes. So this is just an older example of calibrating the model, driving the various functional groups biomass over time with historical fisheries information, and then essentially doing a sum of squares optimization and adjusting those vulnerability parameters to try to recreate past ecosystem change. This is just another example of that from the state of Georgia. But I wanted to mention that, again, this approach is used nowadays to try to understand try to incorporate fisheries histories and the effects of fisheries with the effects of climate change and things like oil spills. And this figure here is just from work some time ago where we're just looking at oil spills, comparing it to the Great Alaska Earthquake, just to remind me that we are just finishing up a special working group of NCs to try to tease out climate from oil spills from fisheries. And this is just some earlier work looking at cumulative impacts of various climate variables on a whole suite of ecosystem models in the Northeast Pacific, where the cumulative impacts really reduced the baseline landings, but the individual variables didn't necessarily reduce the baseline landings that much, but cumulative impacts of all of them did, especially when we incorporated range shifts into the mix, which we can do with these models. So yeah, the simulations can be simple with EcoSim explorations. I was just looking at removal of sea cucumbers, explains the Galapagos anemone barrens, which I had found with a colleague in the Galapagos, and just various dynamics that you might come across and start to explore. And essentially, what you're getting is quantitative hypotheses out of it. And then this was probably the first published example of the use of EcoSpace, I think it was. And this was in a paper that I myself and colleagues published for the Galapagos, looking at sea cucumber recovery. Anyway, so getting into the EcoSpace part, we can use various layers and input or incorporate various layers. This one is just primary production. As we endeavor to redistribute these all the functional groups and species in space, in the space that we have, and then do simulations to both spatial and temporal simulations to estimate then what the overall biomass in different areas and overall would be in space. So we can start to explore spatial hypotheses like closures, like marine protected areas, and in different areas and different seasons, and to estimate what the impacts will be. So that was sort of the old EcoSpace, and now Jeroen Steinbeek has refined it quite a lot. This just describes here that the EcoPath model or the EcoSim model is occurring within each grid cell, and then there's migration amongst the grid cells of individuals. And so the model in each iteration essentially runs within each grid cell. And again, you can incorporate different environmental variables. This one's just depth. And in this case, they were using depth. Well, so you can use depth to actually drive the response of the species continually across space, or you can specify the older way, which is specifying habitat categories based on depth, and then specifying preferences to the various habitat categories. And then in this case, this is just all the functional groups looking at what their responses would be to this little, this in the center, this pink marine protected area, or the lack of response because it's too small or whatever. So, and so it is used to assess the distribution of marine species and fishing efforts, the spatial impact of fishing, and various management options that you can imagine with habitat questions that people have. And it has been now linked to Marxan and Atlantis, and includes an individual-based modeling approach. And as I said, really includes a bioclimatic envelope model. And so back in 2011, it had these limitations. So it couldn't represent subcell features, which is kind of important because the grid size is sometimes at a rough scale because of the constraints, the computational constraints. So to represent multiple features within each cell is a great advancement, and it was unable to explicitly incorporate environmental effects on species. So really the responses and explicitly, and and then it had major limitations in exchanging data, which we really needed. And so we're just in the right time in history, I think, to employ this approach or refine this approach for the South Atlantic Bight, because we will be really on the cutting edge if we implement the EcoSpace in the degree that we can, based on the information that we have. So now it can represent subcell features. I won't dwell on the words here. Yeah, and then the second part is actually driving the responses or the distribution of the species with responses, known responses to the various variables. So it's essentially become an integrated food web species envelope model. Yeah, so meaning that the cell habitat capacity for any given species, for example, is the multiplicative effect of the various environmental responses of the various variables that are influencing the distribution of that species. And so it's a more explicit modeling of the distribution, much more explicit than previously. And so essentially, we can go through and choose whether we use basically habitat preferences, like the way EcoSpace used to be designed for various groups, if that's adequate, or using environmental responses for other groups if we have that information for environmental responses. And that information does exist, and I'll show you how in a sec. So there's a relatively straightforward way of finding those response curves. And so identifying the various variables, bringing in the spatial information about those variables, like this is temperature in a particular example region, and then specifying the response curves for the various variables, and applying them to the various species. And so essentially, just showing Jeroen's, these slides I've been showing, the last few slides have been Jeroen Steinbeek's that I borrowed from him because he has been advancing this. And essentially, he was presenting this foraging habitat capacity case study for the Mediterranean. And by the way, he can explain this much better than I can, but I just wanted to give you an idea of the potential that we have here. So, so essentially, they had 90 functional groups similar to our size, and assigned to 4 EU zones that are management zones, and it's between 1950 and 2010. And essentially, they defined various environmental variables, primary production, salinity, temperature, depth, and then the management restrictions. And essentially, you can pull in the response curves from this bioclimatic envelope model that exists underneath and behind the aqua maps for various fish species, at least. And that aqua maps, you may know that from FishBase if you are a fish person. So those are accessible, at least from this general sense for the various variables. And so so this is an output for one species for the variable depth. So this is not one species, I'm sorry, one aggregated group. It's cetaceans by depth in the Mediterranean. And so that's a habitat capacity estimation for them. And then this is just contrasting that. This is for sardines with 2 different variables, depth and for the Western management area there. And so, as you see, obviously sardines are distributed along the shore because of these response variables, probably associated just with depth, that drove that distribution. And so, obviously, the point here is that when you then estimate and actually when the model redistributes each species or functional groups across space in the specified area, then they interact with the other functional groups in the way they would interact, but obviously limited by their relative abundances across space. And so it becomes much more realistic, if you don't mind me using the word. So then these responses can also then be used in EcoSim. And we're actually using some responses that Ham Ainsworth and his students had put together for responses to oil impacts in the Gulf of Mexico. And he's published some of that work, one in Marine Pollution Bulletin. And so we're using those responses, and those are the very particular kinds of responses because they are to oil based on a really, I think, pretty deep and broad effort for reviewing the literature, et cetera. And so we are applying those to the Prince William Sound model. And so we're going to have explicit forcing of oil impacts or explicit responses of the various groups to oil impact in addition to the fishery impact, et cetera. And that's the sort of integration and explicit modeling that we can do for the South Atlantic region. So there's just a lot of potential. And the other important, let's see, gosh, it's 10:45. I'm going to wrap it up after I just mention this one last thing, and that is that Yaron has, as part of this effort, he put together an approach to really make it friendly to incorporate spatial data in different formats. And so it was very difficult to actually incorporate and utilize spatial GIS data and other spatial data previously, and he's developed just a spatial temporal data framework that enables that incorporation. I won't actually even attempt to get into all the details, but the point is that lots of different sources of information can be used to specify EcoSpace, and it's a much more seamless. But some of these developments that Yaron has made are not in the latest release of the modeling approach because there's still some research and development that needs to happen. This is just, again, spatial temporal data framework. Some case studies that he had done for his dissertation and other publications afterwards. And so it can incorporate GIS data from many different layers or variables. Advection is at the very bottom here, coming soon, because that's something that they have tackled and solved some of the older problem with advection with this. But again, it requires the people who put that together to make it happen, probably for our region. It's not canned. It's not just pressing a button. So there's a bit more complexity to it. Yeah, and so and this is what he was saying, not yet publicly released. Some of it is not publicly released, but we essentially can work with Yaron as a partner to try to make this happen. And yeah, I'm just gonna leave it at that.
All right, thanks so much. No, you're good. No problem. We definitely have, 8 or maybe 10 minutes for questions if anyone has a something they'd want to ask. Just press *6 to unmute. Mallory, you have your hand up. Did you do that on purpose?
Yes, I did. I've got a
Wonderful.
question. I've got a question for Tom. Just curious as to what you might think the timeline would be for specific accomplishment and utilization of some of these approaches in the South Atlantic in that modeling effort. So what's your timeline looking like?
Well, our project is scoped out for 2 years. We were thinking of it as a start, and so we are actually most of the way through the first year, which ends, I think, February, maybe March. But then there is a second year. In the first year, we are essentially our goal is to finish the refinement of the base part, like the EcoPath model, and essentially all of the updating of the rearticulation and the updating of data in that model, and then by the start of the second year, in terms of the EcoSpace here, we want to have our be started off with starting to construct that EcoSpace model. We have. I think I had a slide on on the regional data that are available. So I mean the model outputs of the spatial variables look amazing to me in terms of their availability in 3 dimensions, actually, at various layers. So we can actually put together an EcoSpace first example, I think, halfway through the second year, and we can start on it, I think, by the beginning of the first year. But we just need to the thing about this modeling is you never know. Like, for example, the Forgefish project that I did, you can go through you can design your series of simulations that you want to do, and you go through a whole set of simulations, and then you'll learn something that was missing. It's a classic problem, and then you have to go back and redo all the simulations. So there's a bit of uncertainty in terms of chasing up specific questions and getting specific answers. But I think by the end of the first year, our goal is to have the updated EcoPath with EcoSim model. It might be a couple months into the second year when we able to do the calibration of the EcoSim part, and then hopefully halfway through the second year when we can have a first EcoSpace cut to look at. And then obviously, though, the EcoSpace will really scream out for continual refinement, because you really are trying to model the distribution of species across the whole system, which is, the huge fun challenge of this. Does that adequately answer what you were asking?
Good deal. Thank you. Yes.
Okay. You're welcome.
Great. We have another question from Jim Mueller asking, is there a similar effort taking place in the Gulf of Mexico? Are you aware of anything going on in that region?
Yes, I am aware of, actually, just through Cam Ainsworth. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with Cameron Ainsworth. I don't see him on the webinar today, but he has, he's with the University of South Florida, and he also has EcoPath expertise, and he's also working on some Atlantis models, and has some funded projects from the oil spill. So they are putting together various models there, and then there's nearshore estuarine models. Kim de Mutzert originally put together some models around the Louisiana estuaries, So she's got herself and some colleagues are working on that, some of those, and she used EcoSpace with the help of your own as well. And so that's something that we can build off of. And she's the second author on that paper that I mentioned to you that came out this morning. So and then also I think there was other plans to do modeling with EcoPath out of Tampa, the NOAA group out of Tampa as well. I don't know how far they got though. And then of course there's the West Florida Shelf model, which I constructed just before the South Atlantic Bight model, and then that got refined as well over time. Yeah, there are a number of different efforts happening, in the Gulf.
Great. Does anybody else have a question? Feel free to use the chat box, or remember *6 to unmute. Simeon, are you on the call? We did get a question a little bit about the project that you're thinking about in terms of marine connectivity. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if you were on, I thought I'd give you a chance to speak to that if you wanted to.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I am. Thanks, Tom. That was a great presentation.
You're welcome.
And so what was the question? I'm sorry.
Oh, well, Brett Boston's got a whole bunch of people down in St. Pete for the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council meeting, and there was some interest in what you have planned for your project for like marine connectivity.
So I can say that Tom and I spoke a few weeks ago, and so we just discussed some preliminary stuff on this project. The work that I've been doing is very similar to this, just using different software, and it includes the same structure of effectively these stratified food webs where different functional groups have different movement behaviors. And the question is, how do these different spatial movement behaviors impact the food web dynamics and ultimately the biomass produced from them? So I hope to talk to Tom more about this and your own to see what he's been doing with the spatial applications. So what I was planning was just to develop some modeling for the benthic habitats, the nearshore, using oyster population dynamics and incorporating the oyster reefs into salt marsh mosaic. Now, this can be summarized using EcoPath, EcoSim. Results from that modeling can be used to be entered into the EcoSim model. So I guess I want to know if there is a need for that, if there are some sort of complex population dynamics that we think would be important to incorporate into this modeling. And so this is kind of a question for the whole group, really. And the reason why I asked that question is because the scales vary according to which sort of functional group you're looking at. So benthic habitats, in fauna, sessile organisms don't move much, whereas tunas and pelagic predators range all over the place. So these are sort of questions that I think can be developed with this type of work, and that's what I'm interested in adding to the project. Does that help?
That's awesome.
Or is that confusing, or does anyone have any questions?
Gave you 2 thumbs up for the St. Pete group. I think that's what they wanted to know. Does anyone want to respond to Simeon's question?
Oh, this is Tom. I just thumbs up from me too. I mean, that's obviously it's especially when you're looking at such a big scale, which is where our model sits right now. and then you're trying to think about the dynamics that are happening, these important dynamics that are happening in estuaries. You know, it's a fractal problem. You zoom in to those estuaries, and there's all these dynamics that are super important for people and for species there. And that's you know, was kind of a challenge from the beginning of our effort 15 years ago or so. We thought about that and just essentially did our best to try to incorporate the dynamics on that super large scale that would happen in the, you know, in the estuaries. And so it's diluted. You know, those important dynamics are quite diluted when you just have a reaction vat as opposed to spatially explicit approach. But still, even though we can get spatially explicit and in a much better way, in a much more refined way with the EcoSpace, even though we can do that, we're still constrained by such a large-scale model. And so Peter Shang and I were talking, and he's interested in constructing a much smaller scale model for one of his estuaries. And maybe it's the interaction and interfaces between what Peter is talking about and what Simeon is talking about that will get us the optimal information and try to you know, optimize the level at which we're looking at these things, the scales.
Yeah, that sounds super interesting. So Simeon, I'll just mention, he's a new staff person with the South Atlantic LCC. He's a ecologist with USGS who's joined us recently. So if anyone wants to follow up with Simeon about that, his contact information is on the South Atlantic LCC website if you go to the staff page. We did have one more question from Jim Muller. Do you have any examples of how the models have been used for fisheries decisions and how success has been measured?
Oh, such a great question, Jim. You know, it's I think for a decade it was really just in the realm of rhetoric. You know, like you know, because we were saying we can use these models for fishery management decisions, but early on we were saying, well, you don't want to really hang your hat on the quantitative output. You really want to essentially, it's giving you the direction of change, or even though it's quantitative, it's giving you sort of the qualitative results in an ecosystem sense, right? And so, and obviously at that time we were saying that this is a complement to actual the bread and butter tools that fishery managers have. And that's still the way it's thought of, as a complement to that. It's just, I think, a bit more of a useful complement now. But I think I'm beating around the bush here because what I want to do is actually look for specific examples. But I think it is popping up now. People are really starting to use it, and it's now more explicitly mentioned in the fishery ecosystem plan. I don't know if Roger Pugliese has anything to add to that.
And please feel free to chime in from St. Pete if you want to, Roger.
Yeah, hi, Tom, and thank you. Appreciate the presentation, and I think captures where we're going. And well, I guess what I'd like to add is that one of the most important things we have going right now is the integration of everything from really restructuring the functional groups so that they align closer directly to the way we are managing the species. That's something we're already working together on. That opportunity we're talking about is engaging some of the cutting edge EcoSpace will really potentially advance this. So I think some of the things we had talked about, or even the discussion you just talked about almost nesting models, that was actually talked about earlier on, about nesting, like a model was done for Pampa Sound with the overall. So I think all these are heading in the right direction, and it's good to have the new staff on board, because I think that was also anticipated to, again, bridge and expand the expertise of the modeling team that already is in place to be able to advance this effort. I think it's an evolving effort that's really going to provide right from the get-go is intended to provide functional capabilities. And I think you were right on target too, is that this is adding just another tool to the tool chest and the capabilities, and it will be something that hopefully we can advance. And there's so much that has happened since the last iteration, with even Forge was building from a previous model, and there's so much in terms of new assessments and details. And I think that key of also aligning it very closely with the better information we have on the species, plus all the ability to integrate the habitat distributions and a finer resolution, the ability to integrate the environmental components and the people we have lining up. I think we're heading in the right direction, but I think it's going to be very critical to get Jerome and the newest capabilities on the EcoSpace integrated in this discussion so that we can see those tools really develop where I think everybody wants to see them.
Awesome. Thanks, Roger. Well, we are a little over time, so I don't want to take up any more of folks' time, so I'm going to cut off questions and discussions here, but really, really appreciate your great presentation, Dr. Okey, and everyone coming to join us this morning. If you can spare 2 more minutes, I just wanted to let you know what to expect for our next web forum and let you know that we've canceled the December web forum for the holidays. So our next presentation is going to be in the new year, in January. Same time, same connection info, and we'll be hearing from Rua Mordecai, who of course is the South Atlantic LCC Science Coordinator. Basically, as your cooperative's gearing up for another round of blueprint workshops in March and April of 2017, Rua is going to review how the blueprint has evolved since Blueprint 1 was released back in 2014, and he'll go over the process of how we developed the latest iteration of the blueprint version 2.1 and how it integrated with neighboring LCC spatial priorities to form the first blueprint for the Southeast Conservation Adaptation Strategy, or CCAS. And he'll also preview the changes that we have planned for the next version, version 2.2, through our iterative cycle of testing and revision. So whether you're a new partner or someone who's been here since the beginning, it's really a great chance to catch up on past, present, and future versions of the blueprint. And we hope it's going to set the stage for another round of fun and productive workshops. So if you're planning to attend a workshop, this is a great chance to prepare and kind of brush up on that background knowledge. So really hope that some of you will be able to join us in the new year. As always, here's how to get more involved. I hope everyone has a really safe and fun holiday season and that you'll join us in January. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.